back to the podcast. Javier, good to have you with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm really excited.
Yeah, likewise. Feels really great to be focusing our energy on these and getting these podcasts put out to people. I know that they've the information within them is catered to expanding people's minds around some of the concepts that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And today is no exception because we are talking about the spirituality of contracts. And another way of putting that is the transcendent power of contracts or the sublime nature of contracts. Take your pick. Contracts are very, very powerful. And in our opinion, they are spiritual instruments. And so the structure of the podcast is going to go kind of like this. We have three stages where we start off with kind of the broad notion around the concept, our ideas and thinking on the concept, and then finally what an idealized form of the concept would be. So just to get things started, Javier, from your own experience, what do you think the average person let's just stick to America, in America experiences, feels, believes, thinks about contracts in general?
Gosh, they probably think very little. I think we only come across those things when, I guess, it's demanded of us, right? When we are adults. I think that when we become quote unquote adults, we start to kind of come across these things like, maybe opening a bank account, maybe signing a lease for a car, getting a car, financing, those types of things. And I think that the bigger the transaction, I guess people have a tendency to take it more serious and look upon the terms of the contract and, decide on what level they should get engaged with it. But we're not actually disclosed a lot of the contracting that happens before we're even born, or the contracting that's implied already on, everything that we do fundamentally and administratively. So, the average person doesn't really know too many things unless they deal with it on their job on a day-to-day basis. The average person has really no clue as to really the weight of importance that contracts hold. Because essentially, if we do not put that weight on these transactions of looking at these things little by little, one by one, what ends up happening is we just forget where we are and what duty we had first, what contract goes first. So we're just kind of webbed in. So I think I always like to tell people, it's like, well, because you probably don't even know where to start. How about we just start at the beginning? What do you think started, everything that you are and the place that we're in? Then we start to put contracts in context. Then when we add that context of, well, it's not just my life, it's property, it's other people's lives and all this, we start to see that it matters a lot, especially if we start to think about people's property and what that's, come to be on a large scale as we know it today.
Yes. I agree with you. And I think that by and large, people don't comprehend just how ubiquitous contracting is in our society, nor do they realize the sheer scale and number of contracts that they're actually actively involved in. And it's an unfortunate fact of life and the state of our republic, you could say, that most people, when you bring up the idea of drafting a contract or utilizing a contract that they create to facilitate some sort of mission or outline some sort of agreement between you and another party, it seems like this insurmountable, scary, or too complex thing that they just don't even want to deal with. And what comes to mind for me is people don't recognize the power of the contract until it somehow affects them personally. And one way that you might see this is like with all of the user agreements that you sign up with when you join into a behemoth with like Facebook or Meta or Instagram, YouTube, all of these things. you may at some point, especially if you're doing anything that's somewhat unorthodox or edgy or whatever, find yourself in a position where your life's work gets destroyed overnight and removed from
Yeah.
the platform. And it isn't only until that happens that people go back and they're directed to look at their terms of service and see that, oh, well, in the terms of service, you gave them exclusive right to do that to you.
Yeah.
So there is no recourse. By law, if you were just entering into a common agreement with somebody, like if I would have no right to delete your life's work just because I don't like it. But if I get you to sign a user agreement beforehand that says, hey, you're agreeing to let me do this, all of a sudden, now you have no rights. And that's just one tiny way in which these contracts are unacknowledged and really unappreciated in our society.
And one thing that we should always have in perspective too is because of technology, the ease in which this has, come to be, is that how easy to facilitate. Oh, let's, on benefit. And I always like to remind people that, everything is an offer. Everything truly is an offer. And there are certain conditions. Either you understand what's going on and you offer your own terms, or that it will be done for you. And usually the person that does their own terms isn't going to have your interest at hand. They're going to have their own interest. Their main interest is not going to be one of equality.
Right. I mean, it's human nature. If you're the one outlining the terms, then you're going to always do them in your own favor. And that's just, we always, and I love this about where we've headed in the direction with our work and how we interface with the outside world. The space that we occupy in the truth or freedom world is that we're constantly showing people the difference between the smoky backroom Illuminati idea and the very practical and mundane sort of reality of the fact that we, of our own volition, are kind of creating this issue in the first place.
It happens subtly, right? It's, a contract may be manifest or it may not be manifest, but it happens very subtly in the way that we just make promises to ourselves, commitments to ourselves. And if we observe how quickly we are to dispose of our own commitments, then you start to see why there needs to be stuff written down and enforcements so that those terms pertain to what was meant at the time that that contract was written. But all this gets really lost in translation because it's, number one, I think there's also an element to us making it more difficult for us to commit to things in general. And number two, to actually be completely aware of the terms. And it calls for us to be like, well, it's a responsibility. Like I have to look and I have to read, or I should, right? And now it's the common practice is I should have, but I'll delegate it to some other attorney that'll just say, hey, it's standard and move forward, but really not disclose potentially every part of risk of loss and liability that could potentially exist in whatever deal you're trying to handle.
Yeah. And so, average people, I think a step that they can all take is to consciously seek out and look for, when am I putting pen to the paper? Are these times where I am filling out a form? Are these times when I'm doing that, outlining terms for behavior, expectations between myself and another party? If so, this is a contract. What moving pieces, what entity types, what layers, what implications, what statutes am I inherently agreeing to when I go about putting the pen to the paper? And when you do that, at least, and of course, we always recommend, there's no need for paranoia. You don't have to go, oh, they're making me sign a contract because I had to fill out a bank statement or, whatever it may be, or I had to get a driver's license at the DMV. Be sober-minded, and just the fact that you're aware of what you're doing gives you a lot more power than the average person has. it sets up your expectations. It allows you to navigate with a more clear idea of what's actually going on, anything that you're engaged in. And so that would be for the average person who may come across this, just exercise a little bit of discretion and just notice when you're engaged in these things, and that will empower you to understand just how powerful your ability to contract is should you decide to start outlining terms for expectations with yourself and other parties. And that's where obviously the trust comes in, is it is a templatized form that allows you to do that with other parties.
I wanted to mention another thing about just contracts, and because you did mention, I believe, the government, and people failed also to forget that at the federal level, there is a duty for the government to preserve contracts. Other than, like, let's say crime, this is the other major thing, is to preserve contracts. And really, if at the fundamental level we're saying that this isn't real, we're dismissing a huge portion of what is legal realities. And I think a lot of people get confounded because they're looking at the lower, statutory laws, the legislative Congress stuff. But if we just take a step back and look at, what Constitution says, what some constitutional lawyers have to say about our rights, then things like property and how to administer that become very, very clear. It isn't something apparent like, the statutory law.
Right. And when you get a solid grasp of the fact that the legislative authority is this thing that's placed on top of your inherent and inalienable rights, it allows you to see when you're stepping into terms that or scenarios where you're actually agreeing to the legislative authority, agreeing to be defined a certain way, agreeing to have certain business transactions or what have you placed into that authority. Most people don't understand that legislative authority and common law or inalienable rights are two different arenas in general. And so just being aware of that fact, I mean, it's not sexy to say. Everybody wants this flashy thing where they get to wave their flag and say, oh, look, I've overcome it. But just these little tangible practical steps of being aware is going to empower you far beyond any of these, catch-all solutions that are being peddled.
Yeah, it's funny because I like the title of the podcast because it's called Spirituality of Contracts. And for me, spirituality is an interpretation of the most practical. And it becomes and is perceived as divinatory or mysterious to those who don't see its practical doings. It's kind of like, a farmer going in and planting a seed. And we're really wondering, how in God's creation is this happening? And we're kind of stubborn. We want to check the seed. We want to check if the sprout's coming out, but really we just have to let it, sit and make sure that the elements and the conditions are right to be able to make the right move. But if we have in our headspace that we're webbed with all of these implied rules and regulations, like we get this feeling like we're walking on eggshells. I would tell you to refer back to the constitutional laws, refer back even to God's law to try to reorient ourselves on how to move forward, because a lot of this man's law, it's like what I said, it's apparent. It changes, and there are issues with that, and all major great thinkers have addressed it, and it's so nuanced. And you don't have to read all the scriptures to know, and don't have to read all the legalese to understand that. But those types of limitations are there for a reason, and they're there to test the American people, to test our own ability to administer. And like all the great founding fathers, they always said that liberty comes at a price; it's never free. And there's a distinction made that the people who are citizens, we have the right to defend and restore government and find a way to produce solutions.
Yes, there's a couple of things there that I wanted to mention. The first one being that you spoke about spirituality as being a way of defining the most practical elements of existence and being, and I really like that the way that you worded that. And for me, exactly, that's what it is. It is the ability to define the mundane, the most mundane and elementary aspects of your experience, and contextualize them within the hierarchy of your own understanding. What is the most high as far as you can conceive it? What actually is the most mundane? We use the word mundane, but if you really zoom out and you ask the sages and the great saints of history, what we call mundane reality is really samsara. It's an illusion. It's a made up concept in our head. And so having the freedom to define that for yourself, another glorious protection of being an American, is just another unsung and beautiful kind of underappreciated aspect of our life. And then I can't remember the second thing. No, it's completely gone. I got a little bit too far down the rabbit hole in the first one. We've got a couple minutes left here in this first segment, so if there's anything else that you think that we haven't covered as far as the basic kind of bottom line, if you walk up to the average guy in the street and ask them about contracts, if there's any stone we've left unturned there.
Well, I guess, yeah. I mean, start with the basics. Found out what it actually means to be engaged in a contract. Like, what are the elements of a contract? And decide what terms mean to you. What conditions mean to you. And if you look at a lot of life situations, you're going to find that, and some of the greatest pieces of advice I've gotten from my mentor was that in life, you don't get, what you want, not even what you need, but really you get what you can negotiate. And a lot of that depends on your, I guess, relative stock on reality. And if the more practical you are, the easier it becomes, to act and live that way. But for the most part, the average individual shouldn't be thinking too many great contracts, or, like, for example, a kid shouldn't be thinking about a mortgage if he can't even commit to tying his shoes. Right. That's kind of the mentality. And little by little, and we do this kind of mentally as well, because we sort of lie to ourselves sometimes. And then we think that it's okay. And it is okay, but really what we're doing is we're removing power from our own words. And later, the things that we say, we don't even believe ourselves, and that kind of goes to weigh on, the power of language of contracting.
Yes, and that is a great way to button up the first segment here. And so moving into the second part of this discussion, what is the way in which you have, and I think we kind of alluded to this before about, getting back to the basics, but give us a good synopsis of the ways in which the spirituality of contracts has affected your own personal life and your own interpretation, and what are the ways in which you've actually contended with this concept so far in your own life?
Yeah, well, that's perfect, because I did allude to it earlier, and it does start with minor accomplishments, because we can't say that I'm going to commit to something and not understand, and you might have lofty dreams and all of that, and that's cute, but we need to conserve ourselves as gentlemen, and we have to be able to make those decisions and not be the last decision that we make. So when we make a commitment to an idea, it should be an idea that is approachable, that is challenging, and that takes from you, but also that at the other end of that commitment, there is a fulfillment that's done. And there is, a couple things that happen there, which is not just the result is the terms of whatever is completed, but also I think in my reality, I feel that there is a spiritual component that also alleviates some weight. I think all of us are put in the world to work, and I think that making ends meet with terms on a contract is one way that we can do that and know that for sure. And if we know how to practice that on our own lifestyle, like little goals, oh, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm gonna start doing this, or eventually we start to approach more adult subjects, things like credit and finance. And now we have a larger weight of responsibility that has to be also considered with all these other aspects of life. So from the beginning, being able to kind of assess my own ability to complete, what I set out to do was also the measure later on became the measure of what I knew I can set out in business and complete in real life. There wasn't a false expectation. I knew that there was room for failure. I knew that there was going to be blind spots. And all of this is because you have to consider everything that may or may not go wrong in the thing that you're trying to complete. So for me, it became a complete lifestyle change. Not even that my lifestyle changed, but it was the perception of life that changed. And as a result of that change of perception, I was very easily able to accomplish the things that I set out. And it wasn't any magic or counting or extravagant account, like none of that. It was just, do I believe myself, and can I commit myself to this and complete it? Now that I'm much older and I'm looking at how the average person deals with contracts, it's kind of like, everyone's kind of confused and everyone wants things. And I feel that contracts are a thing that get in the way of getting those things. Instead of being the thing that we confront, we're kind of taught to just not ignore, but here's this in case that, you don't sue me. And that's the only thing that people kind of feel. And that's it. They kind of they rather see the boat, they rather see the house, they rather see what's on the other end of that contract without having to deal with the whatever pros, which is the object or whatever, but the cons, which the interest rates, like the fees involved, like what is it that can be negotiated here? People forget how a lot of things are negotiable in life. People don't realize that everything in life is negotiable. It's the way that we present ourselves, the way that we speak, the terms, knowledge. All this allows for us to conduct business kind of in God's grace, if so to speak, because it does say in scripture that a lot of the times that every time we do such things, that it really is frowned upon to be ignorant of the fact that we're going into a contract, that there is an obligation expected to us. There is power and validity in being able to complete those things and not falling through, or else, what's the world but a bunch of promises? Everyone just promising each other, like the entire, trillions of dollars are just, hey, I'm a promise to pay this back somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in my experience, the concept, and I love this concept, the trustee transfiguration, right? It's the transformation from kind of where you come into the idea of utilizing trust to what you end up being on the way out. In my case, the way in which contracts and taking full authority and responsibility for contracts in my life, it was very pronounced for me, because I went from a W-2 situation, being an employee, building concrete foundations, to renegotiating that entire thing. And it was, as typical as it gets, the W-2 job, everything held in my person, all my bank accounts with the person, every asset I had was in the name of the person. And then coming into contact with this information, I created my trust, I created my fellowship, I created the ways in which I was going to serve my community. And then I reconstrued, I reimagined and took full control over those ways of generating income, and made them into an engine that became the main fuel for my mission on earth. And so I went from the W-2, sign the thing, okay, I guess I pay the taxes, whatever, then I do it. It's all very de facto. I don't really have any conscious control or autonomy over anything. To all of a sudden, I establish this trust. I go through the process of doing that. I then have to draft my own construction contract, my own client contractor contract with the business that I was working with at the time. And I ran all of that through my trust instead. And all of a sudden, I'm working 4 days a week instead of 5. I'm not losing all of the automatic things that are taken out of the paycheck. So I'm making the same amount of money. I have this new vehicle to place my assets into outside of the name of the person. And it was just this very rapid transformation that happened. And I remember, and in hindsight, I love the boldness that I have. It's one thing to come across this like conceptually and like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. It's a whole other thing to like go into the place that's providing you your paycheck every week and say, I've taken a vow of poverty. I no longer want to own anything. I want to do everything through this trust. And if you guys aren't willing to accommodate me, I'm going to have to start looking for another way to make money. And having them hear me out and eventually accepting my terms and signing a contract with me, it was this really cool transformation that really, for me, it marked the beginning of a new era in my life where I was aware of the fact that these contracts are powerful and sacred, and I had taken full responsibility for that fact and decided I conceived what is the highest contract I could ever enter into. And it was that, what I just said. I don't want to own anything personally anymore. I don't want to have to, try to meddle and build up things for my own personal gain. Everything I do in this life, I want to do to serve other people. And, the transformation that came across from that was just, in hindsight, it's so much more powerful than as you're going through it. It just seems like, I don't know, I guess I'm, doing this thing, but in hindsight, everything is different now.
You're contributing to something so much larger than yourself. That's the feeling, that's the idea, and that's what's happening. Versus the traditional feeling of creating an LLC or a corporation. It's like, hey, this is obviously a for venture thing. Hey, if you have a nonprofit, it's a little bit different, but it's what's happening is that this contract trust is essentially a contract that doesn't benefit from legislation. It doesn't benefit from the United States government. And every single citizen has to be made aware that they have an absolute right to contract independently from the United States jurisdiction. And so being able to do this, at least for me, coming from a securities background and being a day trader, I was in a place to organize everything that I thought I wanted to plant in the world. That was my idea. I wanted to create charities. I wanted to produce funds. I wanted to make dreams happen for other people. So when I started to find, that a trust was a perfect vehicle for that type of thing, I knew that not only was I going to conduct business this way, but I was going to conduct every manner in this way, because there was no other way to actually perceive how to do business other than as a trustee, as a custodian, as someone who doesn't want the interest of ownership, but rather sees that the interest of ownership is better placed in his hands for investment purposes, all that, until there's a distribution and, so on and so forth. But I knew that I had struck gold because it was for the first time that I can actually feel and see, even the logos that I was creating in my mind, right? These brands, and I'm feeling my parents, the love that I have for them, the things that they want to do. Community gardens, have a lot of friends, and they're all doing their community gardens. My mother-in-law, she's doing a community garden. And these are things that I'm just like, I can't wait to create a fund to be able to contribute to these things that are helping a lot of people, that are based completely off volunteers. And people fail to forget. I mean, they forget, that there is so many people out there willing to do so much for others, not just for some monetary purpose, but for a raw exchange. You know, we can go out there and do contracts as like, here's this, and you give me that. We don't have to worry about some interest or anything like that.